Hippolytus has uncovered something completely different. His predator does not play with its food, okay? It is all business. It is like an elite special forces military unit. It comes in, it does what it needs to do, and it leaves. And it doesn't leave a frickin' trace. And the kid's body is laying on the tree as if they brought it back as like a gesture. You know, like this predator understands that we need closure, that we bury our dead, that, you know, it understands our practices in that aspect. And so it brought the body back. In the paper of the TLEs, those transient luminous, you know, environmental conditions, they look like they remind me of the depictions of the jinn.
Hello and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. For episode 70, we are joined by martial artist, researcher, and mystic Michelle DeVrieze, discussing her recent research paper into the hidden predator behind the missing 411 phenomenon and its relationship with archetypes and initiation. Are we dealing with a self-serving predatory race using an advanced form of psychological warfare that's terraforming our reality through the human mind? Or is this predatory intelligence an aspect of some elaborate alchemical process which on a macro scale maintains our reality's harmonious balance? To find out, Michelle uses a unique premise to test her hypothesis, that being an Intrinsic Data Field analyser or IDF machine. We wrap up the show discussing the benefits of getting punched in the face. We are both martial artists, so I suppose that was inevitable. I should add, we mean in a controlled environment for health and safety, etc. Now, the show does cut out at the 23-minute mark, so watch out for that. That does tend to happen when we talk about these kind of subject matters. And Michelle's asked me to mention that she was quite ill at the time, so do forgive any croaky voices. This is an epic show. And the plus show is a full 3 hours long. And in the plus show, we go through each of the question tables within the paper and really explore the nature of the predator via the IDF machine, the IDF machine's responses rather. Now, if you'd like to hear the plus show, then sign up for the Patreon for the full extended shows and a host of other benefits. Now, before we start, I'd like to thank my Anchor patron members, Icaro, William O, Robert W, Roland B, Steph, Tim, Tao, Wei, Pamela, Michelle, Marilee, Marco, Jen, Hannah, Flora, Eric, Desiree, Austin, Ali, Carrie S, Brennan, Tyler, and Matthew. Thank you all, each and every one of you, for your support. And if Patreon isn't your thing, you can always buy me a coffee via a link during the show notes, or you could leave me a positive review. Every 5-star rating helps. A little bit of algorithm magic. Now, as always, I'm interested in people's experiences. So if you got something you want to share, something that's taken you out of your paradigm, then give me a shout. Either Twitter, Insta, or leave a voicemail through the podcast. I look forward to hearing from you. Right, let's get on with the show. Michelle, welcome to the Spirit Box.
Hello. It's so good to be here. Thank you for having me on.
It's brilliant to have you here. I know you did a short introduction for patron members. Was it last month? This summer's kind of blurred for me.
I know it. But yeah, it was that was a lot of fun. So I got to dive into just a little piece of the paper and just give them a little teaser. So
yeah, we're going to go through the detail today. So how do we get into this in a
this is like we're going to deal with a lot, so we're going to try and like chop it up for y'all, and that way we can cover as much as we can as concisely as we can. Exactly.
So I'm just going to kind of give the title of your paper and then ask you to kind of give a very short summary, and then let's go into kind of talking about kind of how you got there, because I know we were speaking about martial arts, and we'll get back to that as well, and kind of how that was one of the defining factors and how you think about this. So the thesis is called "The Hidden Predator: Deconstructing the Shadow Side of Reality." Can I ask you to give a short synopsis about what that means?
Yes, you may, sir. So I'm going to actually read my thesis statement and then I'll get into it. That way everyone has like the full, picture of it. So the thesis statement is, this thesis will reveal the subtle predatory ruling intelligence embedded within the fabric of our reality and how humanity interacts with it, often with dangerous and even deadly consequences. I'll prove that merely becoming aware of the shadow archetype of our reality can be a catalyst for an evolutionary growth process of the mind, ushering humanity into another plateau of awareness. And then I basically say, I'm confident that when you stand on this higher plateau, which hopefully you do by the end of the paper, contrary to what most people believe, you will become aware of a very different paradigm, one in which humans are not at the top of the food chain. And so basically the essence of the paper is I really want people to go through a paradigm shift, in a sense, the same shift that I went through, over the past 10 years and what got me to the point where I could actually see the fingerprint of this predatory kind of force. It's like a force of nature is what I look at it as. And then it manifests down, it's like a micro entity that manifests through our reality down into like macro entities. So once, you go through this like paradigm shifting journey that we're going to take you on, you should have a better idea of how to see this fingerprint as I've seen it across multiple disciplines.
Right.
This is something that, it's just not in, certain communities like the UFO community or the all altered states of consciousness community. You can see it like all throughout reality. So that's kind of the essence of it, is that I'm deconstructing this macro predatory essence that you can drill down literally into our reality and see it from a micro perspective. And that's kind of what like the larger picture of it all is.
Right. So the thing that's really awesome about this and kind of having read the thesis and obviously we've chatted a lot over the last couple of months about this work is that it recognizes a threat. And I think that's a really important thing. And we'll get into that as well. And why I think it's really important is that, particularly in the West, we're really naive about spirit work, and then we're totally at a loss when it comes to kind of understanding or even recognizing entities in our society as a whole. And a lot of my initial kind of forays into YouTube, we're kind of saying that from kind of my own experiences. But one of the things I thought was really interesting from your background, and we touched on it there about a little while ago, is how you basically talk about your training as a martial artist, as a fighter, in recognizing threats, or just kind of how you behave as a fighter is slightly different to people who are not fighters. Right. It's
like a way, well, especially because, you and I, we talk about our backgrounds in martial arts. And when you are exposed to it from a young age, I was like between 4 or 5 years old, all the way up until I think it was 9 or 10 when I got my first degree black belt. I was the youngest person at the school to get a black belt. And then I was the youngest person to get a first degree black belt. So I was very young. And, I mentioned in the paper in the introduction, that during those years, that's the time when, your subconscious mind is in theta, and I referenced Dr. Bruce Lipton and how he talks about, you're in this lower vibrational frequency at like a hypnotic state from, all the way up till the age of 7. So for me, that was very, I didn't realize it back then, but for me, that's very helpful, not only as a female, as a woman, but, as somebody then doing this type of work, because my subconscious mind is trained to look at things differently than most people. And you understand that. It's like when, I try and give somebody an example of even when I'm driving and I see somebody in front of me, like I'm stopped at a light, there's a person in front of me that have, those stickers on the back of cars that have like their kids, maybe their jersey number, their name. Well, and then they'll have a son in football, a daughter in cheerleading. Well, I don't see, oh, that's cute, they're celebrating their kids. I see what the predator sees. Okay. You just advertise to the world where your kid's going to be at, because all that stuff's public knowledge.
Totally.
You know, they go to a public school, they know what team they're on, they know their name, they know their jersey number, they know the schedule for the football season. They know when they're home and when they're away. Okay. That's what I see. So like, that's how my mind works. I don't see this as cute. I see, get that off your car because you don't want to advertise that.
Totally. You're basically putting up a buffet for somebody who wants to attack you.
I didn't have to do any work. I can go online. I can go on my phone. I don't even have to go home and look at, okay, I know football season starts in the fall. I know where this kid's going to be. I know his jersey number. Then all I have to do is go on Facebook. Now I know what their parents do for a living because everyone puts everything online. So now I don't, it's so easy. It's like giving candy to a baby nowadays. And this is a human predator that has to do all this work. We're not talking about a human predator. We're talking about something else, and so if it's as easy for a human predator to acquire this type of data, just driving around nonchalantly, imagine what an advanced being can do. And we'll get into that. But I just want to build up that there's predators all around us. And, to think that it's just flesh and blood is I don't know, in my experience, it's pretty naive. So that's what this paradigm shift is that you've got to realize you're not at the top of the food chain. And once you kind of pick yourself up from the floor and realize, shit, I'm not, then you can rationalize things. You can come at this from a mature perspective and try and put yourself in a position where you can deal with it.
I think it's really valuable, and I think one of the things that we have struggled with as a society is that, and I'm quoting Tommy Kelly here, who beautifully put this in a conversation we had. Since the Enlightenment, we've kind of separated ourselves from nature, and in that process, we've separated ourselves in the sense that we have total ascendancy over it. Whereas you go back to kind of more pastoral societies, we're very much aware of the predator you're about to describe, and had technologies, be it shamanic, be it fairy doctor, be it whatever, to deal with it. Right, I'm going to stop interrupting you. And
I'm actually glad that we're going back and forth like this, because what the predator works from that perspective.
Right.
Even a human predator is out prowling around. And that is what you just described right there. They live within that environment. So they are immersing themselves in our environment. Even a human predator is doing that. So that's the one thing that I learned when I was younger is you can't just understand how to defend yourself. You have to understand how to not put yourself in a situation. But in order to do that, you have to understand what is this situation and what is this individual that is lurking within this situation. So, even when you're doing physical self-defense within the reality, the consensual reality that we all understand and live in, you have to expand your consciousness. You have to look at this from all different perspectives. And we'll go into, I call that kaleidoscoping. I call that there's certain terms that I've assigned to those, like those ways of thinking and expanding yourself. And we'll get into those later. But it's really, honestly, what you learn in self-defense for the physical reality is also can be transferred over into like this spiritual multidimensional realm. It's the same thing. It's, expanding your awareness. And I really had a breakthrough when I was writing this paper because I never looked at self-defense from an awareness expansion. And I was like, wow, as I was sitting there thinking of what they taught me, how to look at the world differently, how I look at the world differently. And I didn't really think that I was different until, I grew up and I started talking with people about certain things. And they were like, well, that's kind of a weird way to look at it. It's like, well, that's how I was taught to look at things. I was taught that, you kind of have to keep some people at a distance until you understand their motives. And, as a young kid, that's helpful. But, as you get older, you kind of have to adapt and realize that, you can't just be this paranoid person. So, you learn to adapt and you learn to, to become mature about dealing with other people. And then once you go through that phase of, like your teenagers, your 20s, you work in a corporate environment, you learn how to deal with different people, then you can like start expanding yourself outward even further. So I'm in my mid 40s now. And so I've had a lot of practice at those different phases, like human development as well as spiritual development. And so that's kind of the essence that I believe is what's in the paper. So you can actually attest to that if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, shall we get into the nature of the predator? How do you want to take us through the...
Yes. Yeah, actually, we can start with, I have the paper out here in front of me so that I can make sure we hit like all the points that we need to hit. But basically, I initially saw this predatory force when I was reading David Paulides' 411 novels, or not novels, but his book series. He's got, I believe, 7 books now and 2 documentaries. And so I was just reading this information because because of my background, I was just intrigued by it. I was actually astonished that this was happening in our national parks. I mean, I was just blown away. And I don't even remember how I got onto this topic, but once I did, I just couldn't get enough of it. And it was really weird because I actually have this documented in emails that I sent to David because I would actually send him, information as I came upon it. And every single time I bought one of his books, I bought another book that I didn't realize would have anything to do with it, but ended up I was seeing what he was writing about in these other books. And the perfect example of that was Time Storms by Jenny Randles. And as soon as I read her book, along with I was reading 2 of his other books. Like I said, I devoured his books. So I'm reading 2 of his, I'm reading hers, and it hit me. It's like, oh my God, her book is the living account of the victims that actually survived the missing 411 books. And as soon as I had that information, it all just came together from there. And I could find, it clicked. And my brain was told, I couldn't put the toothpaste back in the jar after that. I could see it everywhere. And it was weird. It was like this matrix opened up for me. And every single book I picked up, I read Anthony Peake, I read, Susan B. Martinez, all these other, Jerry Marzinski, you interviewed him. I was like, I see it everywhere now and I can't unsee it. And so that's when it hit me that, this is actually a topic that I could write on. I've already read all the books. I understand this intimately. I have, a personal background that I can, add to it that gives it some kind of context and richness. And, I hate to say this because it sounds condescending, but it literally wrote itself. I'm not trying to be a jerk when I say that because it wasn't easy, but as soon as those pieces came together, it just wrote itself. And I just kept layering and layering. And I had all the books except for 2, because Anthony Peake just came out with his book that I used. And as soon as I saw the title of it, The Hidden Universe, an investigation into non-human intelligences, I was like, that's it. I got to put this in the paper. So it was like all these books kept coming to me, even up until the very end. And, we were talking, you and I, Dara, were talking earlier, I think it was yesterday, about how I wanted to include some other things, but you really have to just stop and say, I have enough. This is enough here. When I talk to people like you or do podcasts, I can talk about these other, books and stuff that I thought would have been great for the topic, but I just had to cut it off. So.
So you touched on 411. So for some of the people who aren't familiar with that, can you give us kind of a brief overview of what that is? What is
Yes, yeah, definitely. So David Paulides, or it's Paulides, everyone messes up his last name. So I'm going to do the same. So he is a retired detective. His background is in law enforcement, and he when he retired, he went and worked for Silicon Valley. And when he was working in Silicon Valley, some wealthy entrepreneurs asked him to do some investigations. And so while he was doing those investigations, it's when he was in, that's what put him in the national parks. Because honestly, I don't even think he was interested in this kind of stuff at all. And so he's in the national parks. He's working on what these guys paid him to work on as an investigator. And the word was getting around the parks. And anyone who's listened to him has heard the story. I mean, I've heard the story multiple times, so I'm just going to go through it really fast because you can listen to, he has great interviews and he usually starts off with this. So I'm just going to go through it quickly. But so while he was doing these investigations, not related to missing 411, he caught the attention of the park rangers. And when he was, he had left the park, he was staying off site. And the rangers found him, hunched him down, and basically, knocked on his door and said, "We need you to look into this. This is very weird. There's missing people within the park services that, they go missing. We, search and rescues come in. They do all this. It lasts for a couple of weeks and then nothing. It's like nothing. And they're like, it's so weird. It's just very odd. And we would like you to look into this because we've heard of you, we've heard of your background." So, he's like, "Okay, whatever, I'll look into it." So he calls a friend of his that's still within law enforcement and says, "Is there anything to this? You could look, make a few phone calls." So the guy gets back to him and says, "Yeah, dude, this is weird. You definitely pull at the string." And that's how it started. I mean, he just kind of backed into it in a sense. And he has been working that lead ever since. It's been, gosh, I forget how many years now it's been, but I think it's almost been a decade now. And he's still collecting, cases. I mean, he's still active on, I think, Twitter and Instagram. And I think he now has a YouTube channel, but he's still active in finding these cases. And, he just keeps putting out books and books. And I think he's going into South America next because the majority of his books, for those, who want to get into them, the majority of it does deal with United States. But he has gone to Australia. And I believe the last time I heard him say he wanted to go into South America. And part of his book, the one book, goes into Canada, parts of Canada. So it's mostly North America that he focuses in on, which is what my paper is focused in on with his stuff. But then what's nice about Jenny Randall's is she does, more international cases. So it is a good blend of you can see it across the globe. But for him, strictly, that is how he got started. And, once he got into this and, he kind of had a team that was helping him, they started stacking up cases, in his office. And that's when he saw the profile points. And the profile points are what I use as the foundation of my paper. And so let me just scroll it. I'm not going to go through lists of them, but one of the profile points is, for example, canines can't find a scent. And these are search and rescue dogs. Another one is weather. Another one is the timing of.
We're back online. Now, the last time that happened, that was actually particularly bad. That was really quite something else. But the last time that really happened, for no particular reason, it's happened in lightning storms before, but was with Jerry Marcinski, where it just 20 minutes in, boom, went dead. And so you're in good company, and obviously the predator doesn't like being spoken about.
Yes, he didn't like what I was saying at that moment. Yeah. So I'll do better.
Right. So to get us back into things, we were just about to start talking about 411 and David Pilates. Yes. So can you just give us the brief intro into that work?
Yeah. And so David Pilates is a retired detective. And he's basically working as an investigator right now. And he took on the missing persons cases within the National Park Services. At least that's where he originally started. And he was tipped off from a national parks ranger. And, after working with somebody that, a friend of his that was still within law enforcement, that was able to do a little bit more deeper of a dive, they realized that there was something there for him to research and really look into it. And that was about, it's been about a decade, and he has, I believe, 10 books now and 2 documentaries. And what he does is he rules out, he curates these cases, and how he curates them is he rules out animal predation, human predation, drowning, suicide, and then somebody who basically just wants to disappear. So he and his team go through these cases, and they sort everything based on those points. And then how he developed his profile points, which is what is the basis for his books and also the basis for my paper, is that as he was weeding through these 5,000 cases, he noticed stacks. And each stack represented, a pattern. And so that's where these profile points come from. And an example of a profile point is that one of the really strange phenomena is that canines cannot find a scent. And these are trained, bloodhound, like canines. That's what their job is to do. And they will either not want to search, or they will follow the scent to a certain point and then just completely stop and sit down. So that's what we're talking about. That's a profile point. There's a ton of cases throughout all of the books that just stack up just under that one profile point. And so basically I took his profile points and I layered in, the majority of it was from Jenny Randall's time storms. So I took a profile point that he came up with, and I layered in a case from time storms that could possibly provide an explanation for why the dog's not, doing what it's supposed to be doing. And so that's the basis of the paper, is picking apart these profile points, finding similar cases, similar data that can help us explain this unexplainable phenomenon. So hopefully that was concise enough.
Thank you. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And to that end, these disappearances are extremely strange, right? There's someone is just kind of behind a bend on the hiking trail and gets out of sight for a minute, and then they're gone and they can't be found.
It's truly unbelievable, to the point where it's not only children, but it's grown adults that I mean, if you just understand, because we're fighters, we understand when you grab somebody and halt, and pull them away. They're going to fight, there's going to be chaos. There's going to be noise. You're going to see debris. I mean, there's just 1 minute they're there, the next minute they're gone. A human being is not capable of that. At least we don't have the technology that the layperson is aware of. So it's literally as if they're here 1 minute, they're gone the next. They're plucked from, or they go into this other space. So that is one of the examples that a lot of the witnesses, are attesting to. They're basically saying that exact thing.
And then one of the really strange things is the kind of after the fact, maybe a year later or several years later, then items of clothing are found or neatly stacked, and perhaps kind of the remnants of body parts, bones are found. But they're found in a way that is not chaotic. It doesn't look like it's the product of an animal devouring somebody who, say, took a fall, something like that. They're stacked. Exactly. They're stacked in a way that shows intent.
Yeah. Now there are, just to play devil's advocate, there are cases where maybe the bones are a little bit scattered, but that's because something, came in afterwards. But next to that is their jeans, their belt is rolled up, their jeans are neatly folded, their shirt is folded on top, and their shoes are right next to it. I mean, it's that weird. So you can tell, an investigator can say, okay, this is not normal. The animals that came afterwards that did this are not capable of neatly doing this.
Yeah.
So there are instances where, there is debris with this other weird phenomenon, but it still doesn't, it's still weird nonetheless.
I got you. Okay, cool. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, so looking at kind of Randall's and Paulides' work, you started to kind of build the nuances around this predator archetype.
Yes.
Can you take us through that?
Yes. Yeah. So, basically what I started, so once I was going through the profile points and once I was layering in Jenny Randall's information, I was starting to see a pattern of behavior. And this was a different pattern of behavior than what I was seeing when I was reading Jerry Marzinski's material, when I was reading, stuff that, Paul Eno was writing. They're talking about like a parasitical entity that is almost like obsessing and trying to possess us. And there's a line in my paper where I say, I think it's in the conclusion, David Paulides has uncovered something completely different. His predator does not play with its food. Okay. It is all business. It is like an elite special forces military unit. It comes in, it does what it needs to do, and it leaves. And it doesn't leave a frickin' trace. All right. And so this is a highly advanced predator that it's either hunting or it's, it has some type of agenda that it's executing flawlessly. And it's been doing it for centuries now that it's been dating back. And it's doing it in such a way that a human being is not capable of performing these types of acts. So there is a difference between the predator that David and even Jenny Randall's writes about versus, what somebody like Jerry Marzinski, which you've already had him on, what he talks about. These people in the 411, missing 411, they don't hear voices. This thing isn't trying to, mess with their psyche. It's catching them off guard. It's a total, like a lion, it's creeping up and it's snatching you. Mm-hmm. So, the parasitical entities, they're like feeding off of us. And I put it in the paper. I don't know if you remember the point where it reminds me of the remora, those fish that always follow the sharks and the whales. Yeah. And they like attach themselves to them. That's what a parasite to me, in the sense that Jerry Marzinski was talking about. They kind of just linger. But this other predator, it's a completely different animal. Yeah,
that makes sense. And there's different behaviors here. So it's like to Marzinski's point, that parasite, it maintains the human being as, a host, right? Yeah. So it basically, it's more of a kind of like it's an exploitative relationship. Whereas and then if you look at kind of fairies, when people have been abducted by the fairies in folkloric past and then the folkloric past, they come back sometimes, but they come back with a gift. They come back with some sort of inspiration. They come back with, poetry. They come back with music. Here they're just gone, and they're consumed.
Yes. Yeah. And if they're, they're either not brought back at all, or if they are brought back, they're brought back without any damage done to their body. So that's another just weird aspect of it, is that, they'll be searching for this individual. There's one actual case, actually there's probably multiple cases, but one that I can remember right now that's in the paper, where they walked this same trail. I mean, you're talking hundreds of people every day for weeks and weeks to get to the point where they think this person could be. And then one day they're walking the trail and there's a tree down and the kid's body is laying on the tree as if they brought it back as like a gesture, like this predator understands that we need closure, that we bury our dead, that, it understands our practices in that aspect. And so it brought the body back. And we don't, and then a current coroner, sorry, I'm having trouble talking because of my medicine, but when they do an autopsy, there's no cause of death. And that is very unusual to not find a cause of death. And so when you say consume, I like that you said consume, because we have to look at consumption from a different perspective. This, and that goes into this pattern of behavior where how we consume food is not the same as the way this predator consumes food. So when I see an individual brought back lifeless, no damage done to them, something was taken from them. So is this like, obviously their soul was extracted. This is like a completely different topic, but the abduction phenomenon talks about that. And people have drawn amazing, depictions of what happened to them on crafts where they've seen souls being taken in and out of the bodies. But that's like another paper in itself. But so something is extracting the essence from this individual. Is it doing it for food? Could be. Is it doing it for other reasons? Are we dealing with like an alchemical procedure? Are they alchemically removing our essence to use it for some other types of means, which, we can get into those questions later. But that is how odd the situation is when they find these bodies. And, so I look at it as, someone like the search and rescue team find them, they have closure, it's done, the case is over with. Okay, no, for someone like me, I'm like, oh, hell no. Why would you bring the body back? I look into the metaphysical side of it. Why would you bring the body back at all? I mean, there has to be some type of understanding that they think this is acceptable, and they, meaning the predator, thinks it's acceptable to bring this back and, handle the closure of the situation in that manner. So that's where my mind automatically goes, is there's an intelligence here that thinks it's acting responsibly, but doesn't fully understand the concept of being a human being, which means they've probably never been a human being, which means we're not dealing with a human being. So that's kind of where my thought processes go when I see something like that. And so that's why I felt compelled to write the paper.
Now, one of the really interesting things that you've done in this paper is that you've looked to try and paint a picture to really kind of explore this phenomenon, again from Randall's work and Pilates' work, but to then try and build a basis for it, not just in metaphysics, but to look at kind of like the physical world and kind of go, well, what does our academic science say is well in this areas, and see if you can kind of solve the puzzle that way as well. I mean, you've talked about transient luminous events and excuse me, as part of these time storms in terms of Randall's work. I think what might be good as well for the show is to briefly talk about kind of like, because I don't think we've gone into time storms in any detail, but let's talk about what time storms are, and go into the TLEs and start to kind of build that side of the story.
Okay. So with the 411 cases, all that David Pilates does is, he just lays out the cases and he goes through the facts and he presents everything and then leaves all the speculation to the readers. Jenny Randles does the same, but she has a different background. She actually, has more of a scientific background. She has, I'm going to look because I believe she either taught at MIT or she consulted with MIT. But anyways, that's her type of background, is more scientific. So when she looked at the cases that she presents in her book, she came up with the idea that this is electromagnetics. Something within this environment is producing these time storms through electromagnetics. And there are just so many powerful cases, and all throughout her book, that perfectly describe how the human body reacts when it comes in contact with, an electromagnetic charge. And, she is basically just showing and portraying what the witnesses are experiencing and then overlaying that with the scientific data. And so, you have these people saying, I felt the pins and needles on my skin. I felt like my skin was crawling. There was an electrical smell in the air. You know how whenever you step into a elevator, sometimes you could smell that electricity. And so they would smell that. Everything that has to do with the chemical, reactions that occur within our environment when there's a storm that occurs. They're talking about the fluctuations in the pressure changes. I'm here in Florida, and I tell you what, you can feel the barometric pressure when it shifts here. And these people are describing that perfectly. They're talking about the shifts in temperature. They're talking about not only can they hear it, smell it, feel it, they can see it visually. They'll see mists, fogs. The one example that's in my paper, that's my favorite example, this woman and a group of people see this fog that's the size of a house, she describes. And she says in the middle of it, it's physical, but then the edges are kind of foggy. But so it's like this thing that she is describing. She can see it has an essence to it. And it tracks around their car as if it's investigating them. So it has this intelligence. And, as soon as I saw the pictures, which are actually in the paper of the TLEs, those transient luminous, environmental conditions, they look like they remind me of the depictions of the jinn, and just the colors that these people are coming up with. And then I look at the picture and it's the same color, on this scientific data. And, then this woman's describing this. I'm seeing it, in this image that I'm looking at. And one of the best images is the blue jet. So in my paper, there's a picture of a blue jet. And I got it from the atmospheric. It was like a government website for, explaining atmospheric conditions. And the picture of it perfectly goes with the time storm example that I put in the paper. The guy describes a tube of blue energy coming down and whirling around his car. It caused him to heat up to the point where he was boiling and on fire. And it caused his car to fade in and out as if the atoms were, phasing in and out of realities. And this happened right before he passed out because the heat and the experience was so much that it knocked him out. And the way he described it looked exactly like the image of the blue jet on that website that I was looking at, the atmospheric website. So I'm not quite sure if the predator is creating these time storms or, if Jenny Randall's, her explanation is this is a natural earth phenomenon that just happened. She's, we're not quite sure. We don't understand it yet. There's the science behind it, but she doesn't have a full explanation of it. So I'm basically speculating when I'm saying that the predator has an understanding of this and is using it, to its advantage.
Yeah. And this gets to there's two things I want to explore here. So firstly, it harks back to what you and I were discussing before we hit record, which is essentially as a species dealing with potentially another species, we're not even bringing a knife to a gunfight here. We're completely outgunned. Exactly. So if something is able to kind of interact with our nervous systems or control the environment, interact with the environment in a way that kind of has this kind of influence on our bodies and minds and what have you, then we're completely outgunned. We don't have the technology to deal with that in a modern sense. In an archaic sense, we probably do, and you touch on that in the paper in your introduction, which is really saying what we kind of quote unquote see as kind of like some of our archaic societies have a particular calling for this, within kind of shamanism in its broadest definition. Now, the second bit that I wanted to kind of talk about this is around, you said you're speculating, but you use a really interesting device here to qualify your speculation. And this is the bit that I think is I think you've brought together kind of a number of different things in terms of spotting patterns, spotting kind of an overlay of going, well, actually, are these things related in terms of the TLEs, and then kind of on top of that, you've used the kind of the IDF procedure to explain, or indeed kind of like qualify your assumptions. And you did that with Phoenix Aurelius, who's also a previous guest on the Spirit Box.
Yes.
So
that actually came. I was pretty much almost done with the paper when I came across Phoenix and his work, and I actually contacted him to talk to him about the alchemical change that I went through. So it had nothing. It was so serendipitous the way that he and I met, similar to the way that you and I met. And so the first meeting I ever had with him was talking about that. And then as we were talking, I kept hearing this beat, and I'm like, what is going on? Well, he was using, this IDF machine, and it's a machine, it's actual machine. And it has like this, it's almost like the size of a pen, and, it works with your computer and it reads the environment, and it reads the intrinsic data field. I have the hardest time saying that word. I have no idea why. It's intrinsic data field. So I'm going to say IDF so I don't mess it up. But so it reads the data field. Now you can look, there's so many people have talked about this field, call it the matrix. Rupert Sheldrake, is that his name? He calls it the morphogenic
fields.
Yeah. Lynn McTaggart calls it just the field. A lot of physicists like back in the day called it the ether. It's the same thing. Okay. So that's how I was introduced to it. He's using this machine, and I'm like, what is this machine? And so he's telling me about it, and I'm like, it sounds like a lie detector test for the environment, the reality. And so, after we had that first call, working on my paper some more, I'm like, I wonder if you could use it for a paper. And so that's what he and we went through a couple different sessions, and we went through every single, as much as we could. We probably spent 6 or 7 hours going through it all, because it's very labor intensive when you're doing this. It's fun doing it, but the process is very scientific. It's very methodical. It's very dry, but it's fun because he and I we're just geeks about this kind of stuff. So we just geeked out for like 7 hours, with each session. But so I went through each of the main points, that I wanted to cover in here, and I wanted to get as close to a 100 as I could get, and a 100 is like the way it's calibrated is 100 is yes. And yes means it is accurate for the reality. So it is correct in accordance with the laws and the rules and regulations of this reality. So for example, you could say like the first thing we ever did was the title of my paper. Okay. I had 4 different titles. And each one, we ran through the machine. Some of them came up, one came up in the 70s, one came up in the 80s, and 2 were in the 90s. And I wanted to get 100. I wanted to get absolute 100. This is the best title. And so I took the 2 that were in the 90s, I split them up, mashed them together, and I finally got the title, and it was 100. And what's really cool when you use this machine is that once you get that 100, it's like common sense. It's like, that makes so much sense. That was the perfect title for this. So it really helps you, zone in on something for the accuracy of it.
So, this might be a question for another time, but how does the machine work? Like what's it measuring? I know.
I have like the hardest time describing it. So you'll have to have Phoenix on to really go into it, or Don Paris. Don Paris is, I actually communicate with him on a monthly basis now, but he created this, he kind of took over where the experts from back in the day developed all this technology. Yeah. He took over. He's the modern expert today. And so it's basically, it reminds me of what a psychic does. A psychic taps into the environment around us and basically fields the data and then interprets the data based on what you're asking it. It's like a mechanical psychic.
It's interesting you talk about that because it does sound like basically, as you say, reading the field. That's what divination does, right? Divination is engaging with the field.
This is almost like a modern day divination device that's hooked up to your computer. Yeah. And I know that sounds really hokey, but John Paris, he works mostly internationally because it's very dangerous. And he actually describes this. In the United States, it's very dangerous to do that type of work. Sure. Radionics. It's called radionics because, and he has stated this, I've heard him, most of his colleagues that have tried in the United States have disappeared, in quotes. So he and his wife live in Bali, and they work with mostly India and China. And they actually work in correlation with hospitals. So this is like real science. It's just not something that's recognized in the Western world because it's cheaper than the pharmaceutical industry. We'll just say that.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And I think what we're going to do in the plus section is we're going to go through the various questions and kind of work out them as well, because you describe kind of basically it's the higher the amplitude is the
closer you get to a positive. Yes, that is correct for this reality because and I included in there when there were times when it was like we got a 73%, which anything above a 70 is a yes. Yeah. So, so I wanted everyone to see, I wasn't just going for like 100s. I wanted to see, is there a possibility that something could kind of, because like when you get into the 70s or 80s, you're kind of there, but you're missing something. Okay. So that helps you think about it differently. It really does help you think differently.
Now, we'll come back to that in the plus section. Okay. Going back to the profile points, one of the ones that really jumped out to me was the presence of water.
Yes.
Because you're straight into fairyland there as well, right? Mm-hmm. And water is, I mean, if you go back to our Celtic ancestors here in kind of Britain and Ireland, water was seen as a gateway into the underworld, into the other world, and votive gifts, the idea of like throwing things that are precious into the water to give it to the fairy kingdoms and what have you, is an integral part of Celtic / Gaelic life, similarly across the world. And also, I mean, you mentioned mists as well. So like the mists and the water thing are very much intertwined with fairy / jinn and experiences and lore, right? I mean, even think kind of what jumps to mind straight away is the idea of like you've got selkies, you've got mermaids, you've got things like Jenny Greenteeth, the kind of the horrible fairy in a river that will snatch small children, this kind of stuff. So all that stuff is there, but you've also got kind of the lady in the lake, the white lady in the lake, who comes up and kind of initiates Arthur, that kind of stuff. You've got Anya, the sun goddess, by her lake in Loch Gur in Ireland, where she sits on the bank and combs her hair after bathing, and so there's a huge legacy of folklore, of mythology, of real experience that people have from these areas, and like this is the thing I really enjoy kind of reading through your papers. It's just setting off kind of folkloric, buzz, kind of just right over the target with it.
I'm so glad you're bringing this up because I don't have like your background, so and neither does David. Yeah. So it's like when it's almost like we're validating. You know, he's validating, Jenny Randles is validating all of these old stories that like, you know, these cultures grew up with. And it's like, yeah, we're still seeing this today. And here's like the 7 books on it, you know, and they're not fairy tales anymore, people. These are like come from Freedom of Information Act requests. You know, these are FOIA requests. These are like, you know, David will actually call the station and get the actual case file on these people. So this is, you know, real tangible stuff that you can touch and feel at your fingertips that also, you know, basically correspond to all these other things that you're talking about that, you know, you're warned about through fairy tales. And, you know, you hear it. I've heard it in movies where it's like the stuff of fairy tales is real. And it's like that's like a romantic thing, but then it's not so romantic when you actually see, you know, a lifeless body with no explanation.
But it's, I mean, we've had kind of like the whole fairy world. I mean, basically kind of, we've had it sterilized, right? In terms of culture, we've had it sterilized. We think of fairy, we think of Tinkerbell, we think of Disney. Right. We think of kind of like pretty little kind of, you know, beings floating around that are kind of benevolent and kind of grant wishes and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, we don't think like your kind of like, you know, your rural British or Irish person in the 17th century where they're like, I'm fucking terrified of fairies. I don't know. I don't understand them, but I know that it doesn't come out well. You know, my life will be turned on its head. Something will happen. My child will disappear, you know, or I'll go blind. Who knows, right? So you've got all those kind of things that are kind of there, right? And you have then through folklore being kind of a living, you know, oral history, a log or interpreting the world that's told in story. Yep. And it's coming up with the same stuff that you're talking about in the profile points that you build this case. And like, I mean, and I call it a case as well, because you are kind of like getting that sense of what Politis is doing in terms of kind of that police background. You're building a picture. And indeed, again, going to your martial arts background, you're building a picture of like, what is the opponent? What are their behaviors? What are their traits? What are their strategies? And to start to kind of piece that together. And then kind of reading through it, I'm seeing this overlay of folklore on top of it, you know.
Yes.
So it's really interesting. I know I sent you Lee Morgan's book as well.
I'm really excited to get into that. Yeah. Yes.
Because I mean he's a really great authority on this. Anyway. Right, I've gone off on a tangent. So let's get back on point. So we're talking
about water,
and you bring in Josephine McCarthy as well.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes, I read. What was the book? It was on The Exorcist's Handbook. Now it was funny because, you know, I have all these books, and if you just lay them out on the table, you're like, what were you thinking? Like, you're just, it almost looks like I'm all over the place. And it's like, no, you do not understand. Once you read the paper, you will see, whoa. It's like I had all this yarn, you know, and I just wove this like pattern, and then like this predator's face was there at the end. It was like, you know, so, and I love that, you know, first I read the dry case points, you know, it's like I went through all the dry stuff. And then it was like, I came across Faces in the Smoke by, I think it's Doshan Jersey. I'm terrible at pronouncing names, but he was like an explorer. I so wish he was alive today. I would have loved to interview him, but he is like, his book takes all the other books and puts it all into one. So like I have like the dry stuff, I have his book that is like encapsulates everything. And then I have all these other little books like Josephine's books, Anthony Peake, you know, Susan B. Martinez, and they all kind of like are woven in, and they all have this different piece to the puzzle. So Josephine came in obviously, I'm sure your audience is very familiar with her with her magical background. So I layered in the work that she does through exorcism and magic. There was a ton of stuff in her book on water. And so I'm like, holy cow, that goes with what Anthony Peake's talking about. That goes with Carlos Castaneda, in his information. And so there's like this magic, shaman, science, fairy lore, spirit world. All of these people are experiencing this predator from a different, professional perspective, but they're all talking about the same damn thing. And water is, I cannot believe, I could have just done an entire paper just on water and rocks, just like water and boulders and granite. And, so her information was just completely incredible, talking about portals and how, several of the authors agreed that portals water is a portal between the dimensions. Flat out, that's their interpretation. That is their experience. That is what they, all seem to agree upon. And I'm telling you, these people probably don't even know each other. So water was a very, very, very important part. And I also layered in how Carl Jung goes into the psychology. He talks about water in a more of a psychological sense and how it it's like the undiscovered, subconscious. And that's kind of where this predator is also lurking, is in your subconscious. So yes, water is a very, very important. I don't know if you want me to go into the specifics of what some of them, talked about with the water, or if you want me to.
I think let's keep it to
just like the general. Okay.
The general. Oh my God, the full moon's just risen. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Well, it's still early here, so.
Yeah. What I was going to say is, let's go into the stone bit as well, because again, reading through your paper, when you were talking about kind of like granite, and like obviously this kind of thing, it's got a huge crystalline content to granite.
Yes.
I grew up in the bog. I grew up in the boglands of Ireland. Granite is everywhere, and and fairy lore is everywhere. But one of the things that really struck me was, where are fairies associated with? Well, they're associated with forts, with fairy forts. And they tend to be kind of archaic megalithic sites, right? That kind of thing, that are generally stone-based. So there is that association with kind of like, well, these are the material elements that facilitate these portals happening, these entities appearing, these the entities being able to engage or do whatever they do with human beings. Because I think what you're describing here, and I think it's an important distinction, is there's a specific behavior that you're talking about here. It does not mean that all spirits, all fairies, all entities behave in this way. There is just a specific segment that tend to behave in this way. I think that's quite an important distinction. But
I'm glad. I want to interrupt you just one second before I forget. I wrote it down. I'm glad that you said that, because there's a question that I put either in the beginning or the end of the paper where, sometimes being too skeptical can't actually help you in like a slight way, as long as you're open. But when you're talking about like the creation of these old sites, I go to like this other space where I'm like, what if the predator was actually terraforming our environment through, and that's what I put in the beginning, through the human mind, influencing us to create these sites so that it can easily come and go. So it's like, here we are thinking we're doing this spiritual thing. We're like, and I don't want to, be just like rude to somebody that practices that, but this is the way I think. What if that predator was actually influencing you for their benefit, not yours, and then making you think it was for your benefit, and then just sucking like the food off of you as you're going to worship or you're doing your rites, your rituals. And so that's where my mind goes, is that that's how savvy this predator is. It could actually make you think you're doing something good, but you're not. Not for you.
Yeah, 100%. I totally get where you're coming from. And it is, again, it's that thing with, well, it's a setup, right? That's what you're describing, and again, going back to the fighting motif, it's not the first jab that you need to worry about, right? It's the fourth or fifth, because you're being set up. Those kind of first four strikes are to confuse you, to lead you down a different path, and then you get chinned. You get chinned by the fifth one, that you don't see coming. That's what you're describing, right? It's kind of going, I don't understand the motivation of the spirit I'm dealing with. The spirit tells me you should build this thing.
Yeah, I mean, like, look at what is it, Karnak?
Spirit's lie.
Fred Silva. He's in the paper, and I have his book back here. He's very scientific. I think I focused mostly on his interviews because he talks about the stones at Karnak, all those stones that are lined up in like rows that go on and on. And he was saying how they breathe every like 70 or 40 minutes. They like expand and contract. Their like energy is coming and going. Well, okay, that's for a reason. I'm sorry, but if I was an intelligent force and I was taking advantage of this planet and the people within it, I would come up with some story like, oh, this is going to be, this is like, I'd come up with some lore to totally fake people out, but it would be for my advantage. So that, because like we were talking about, I think we were talking about this before we hit record, a parasite, it has to, you can't have mutual destruction. You have to keep the host alive. You have to keep the host in a state that is beneficial for you. So, there's all these different patterns of, these sacred sites, they're probably producing a specific type of product. Now, this is where the my business corporate background comes in. If I'm a predator and I have to understand consumption from like an electromagnetic or energetic type of perspective. I don't eat food that we eat. I don't drink like liquid. I consume energy. Well, there's got to be a variety. I'm going to get sick of eating the same damn shit. So this type of food that comes from like these spiritual sites, maybe that's more of an aphrodisiac. Maybe that's like, or caviar. And then the food that's produced through war, that's more of like, maybe it's junk food. It's a different variety of juice that they're squeezing. They're squeezing us in different ways to provide a certain, array, a cornucopia of product that they're selling on, whatever their side is. And it doesn't have to be food. It could, we could be looking at master alchemists. They could be wanting to extract a certain essence for whatever they're doing on their side of things. Yeah. So that's why, I don't know if you want to go into, I actually am somebody that when I look at these types of topics, I'm an all the above person. Everything's in play in this reality. So I can argue all the points and I can be in agreement with everybody at the same time. It's like all of the above is at play here.
Well, I think you make a very interesting point, which is essentially what's the motivation? What do they gain from this? And like, there's a temptation to try and kind of understand the logic of spirits or entities. And it's one that I think we have to be very mindful of, because you end up kind of going down, well, just projecting human logic, right? Which is just the kind of the natural instinctive thing to do. But one of the things that really I find really interesting, and it's a kind of the brief conversation that I had with our friend Elise prior to starting the show, was around kind of, well, essentially saying we're in a shared world. We're in a shared reality. And what if the entities or intelligence that we're sharing it with are not particularly happy with us? And, with good fucking reason, right? we're destroying the place. If you take into account that water is a portal, if you take into account that stone provides some sort of kind of like anchoring point, an energy point, we're covering the place with tarmac. We're covering the place with concrete. We have done, and I want to stop saying we have done, because that starts to individualize contributions to ecological destruction, and it's not. There's fucking corporations who are.
I was going to say, right? Don't let me into that.
Yeah, exactly. That's an important distinction, right? It really is, because we say that all the time. We've done this. We've done that. So no, we fucking haven't.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
We haven't. I don't have the same black spot on my soul as fucking Monsanto do, right?
Yeah,
so let's just separate that.
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with red tide, and I don't know if if you're familiar with it, but red tide is a toxic algae that blooms off in the Gulf of Mexico. Right. And this time of year, water is like 90 degrees. It's just like bath water, and it just breeds this stuff, and that is a direct, it's directly from the chemicals that, pesticides and stuff like that going into water. It's the Earth's reaction to that. So no, I totally get what you're saying. And so again, I'm an all of the above individual. So I believe I totally get what you're saying. Yes, I would be pissed off too. But in another sense, this predatory type of essence is also poisoning us, as in like the society as a whole. So is it responsible for us acting this way? This is what I'm talking about, the terraforming. Terraforming this reality through us. So, maybe it's creating the CEO of Monsanto to do just that, because, and that's what I really, really think about consumption, probably a lot more than like anyone ever does. And what I can picture is that, the things that we find palatable are not palatable to like a vulture. I mean, nowadays when I'm driving, I see these huge vultures on the side of the road because, there's always, animals coming and going. Okay, what are they eating? They're eating rotting frickin' flesh. None of us find that palatable, but they love it. They come miles to eat it. So that's what I'm talking about when I say you have to look at consumption in that way. So this predator, it may need us to be sick. It may need this planet to be sick. So I understand what you're saying, but I get mad because what if they're influencing us to be like this? So then we're all fighting amongst each other, and it's feeding off of everything because it's creating this whole toxic environment because it's a vulture, like in quotes. Yeah. And that's what it eats, is a cesspool of that just is like a huge distinction then from what we would say is kind of like, I guess in the nature spirit type of kind of fairy, right? We would have a big distinction there. That sounds like an external force that thrives on degradation. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it could just be like the essence of chaos itself, and it hits every dimension. It doesn't matter if you're human or you're fairy or whatever. You're going to get hit with the essence of chaos in the way in which the humans are going to pollute the water that you then, rely upon. Well, that's chaos getting to you as well. So you're not safe even in fairy world. You know what I mean? It's like, so that's why, I wanted to, even though this is such a negative topic, I wanted this paper to be as positive as it can be. And I wanted to show that even though we almost seem to be kind of like the victim of this, this energy or this force, that you can survive it. Even, it doesn't matter. Even if you're like a fairy or a human or whatever dimension you find yourself in, this can be a catalyst for like an evolutionary growth process. And it doesn't always have to be negative. It doesn't always have to be horrific, in the end. And so I just see it as affecting everyone and everything. And it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you're a nature spirit. It doesn't care. It's going to do its job no matter what.
Okay.
And its really job is a predatory. It is a predator 100% of the time. It doesn't care if a nature spirit is more in line vibrationally with it. It doesn't give a shit. It's going to fuck up your world no matter what frequency you're on, because that's its job. And that's just how it's almost like I understand this entity from a very personal perspective. So that's the essence that it's coming, at me with, and saying, yes, this is what I am. This is what I'm capable of. And I don't give a shit what or who you are.
Yeah.
I'm going to do my job, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability.
Yeah. Gotcha.
And, you either sink or swim. And that's one of the, kind of the aspects that I come up with in the paper.
Well, as we kind of approach the kind of closes of the regular show, let's discuss then sink or swim. Okay. And some of the kind of the language and terminology you come up with, kind of, with like in the kind of the discussion section of the paper, you describe kind of you talk about things like the firmament, again, to build a picture of kind of like how there's multiple realities and how these things might be interfacing with us through like the interference patterns between red and blue light. You kind of use that picture to kind of show essentially the spaces between worlds, the spaces between realities, where our insertion points. And I don't think we need to go through that. I think you do a very good job in terms of like building, this may be the science behind how things interact with this world and are unseen. But what I wanted to kind of get to, and I think it's quite important for us to close out this show, is to think about it in terms of, okay, the behaviors that you've identified. So things like, you can the sink or swim, the catch and release, but fundamentally your conclusions around people changing, kind of more broadly, because I think it's a really interesting point, and I kind of, in a way it's kind of very indicative of like, well, why did I start this podcast? Of why do you start thinking this way? In that there is the terraforming of our minds that might be a reaction, less so kind of a direct cause, but a reaction. Around whatever this kind of, we haven't used the term yet, but plasma entity might be doing, and how that kind of changes human beings. So we've got those bits as well. So like in the paper, you talk about the kind of the etheric ocean, and how kind of we are swimming in it unbeknownst to ourselves, really broadly. And then you break out sink or swim, snatch and grab, catch and release, as some of the kind of the defining behaviors. So let's quickly go through them and then get to kind of your point of what you believe the kind of fundamental reason is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Like the actual good news.
Yeah.
I wanted to end the paper because I think I even put in an introduction that, as a metaphysician, because, I'm writing this for, an academic purpose, I want other metaphysicians to look at this and realize that, we have to be aware of not only like the light side, but you have to be aware of the dark side as well. And so that's why I wrote the paper was, from that perspective of we have to see both sides and we have to know how to operate and function within both sides. Yeah. And so I love how you brought up, the different behaviors that the predator kind of has to, it's the protocol that they have to operate within. It's their rules of engagement whenever they come into this reality. And I talk about how the way that they use archetypes is almost like a very advanced behavioral science. So, this predator is like the ultimate scientist, the ultimate psychiatrist, the ultimate everything, all of the above. And so they understand how the fabric of this reality and how to operate within it, and how to do it safely, and how to do it where they're unscathed. Okay. So they have these different, almost like storylines that they have to follow, because we all, are part of our own little individual storylines. And then they have to kind of insert themselves in to each one of us. And now the best one is the sink or swim, because that's the one that, I actually show examples of. And the sink or swim is like an avatar that the predator, it's like a suit that they put on in order for them to safely, basically navigate our etheric ocean and interact with us to do whatever it is that they come here to do. And so within that avatar of sink or swim is their rules of engagement. So for the sink or swim, it basically has to be somebody that's coming here that vibrates at a frequency of like a shaman or a sorcerer. And so the way they interact with whoever they're picked to interact with, they have to, put that person through an initiation program. They have to either, they have to activate the program, work with the individual, and then it's up to the individual whether they sink or swim. And so with that particular avatar and those rules of engagement, the human being should activate within them their ancestral gifts and talents that, have been adapted through, back all throughout time. This predator has been working this lineage, this DNA chain all the way up until you. And you should have, if you come across this predator and it's the sink or swim, the shaman, you should be able to activate these, primordial gifts that have been perfected within your DNA chain. And boom, you should be able to handle the situation. And you should be able to spar on the mat of the dojo of this predator, and you should be able to tap him out. And, so that's the essence of the sink or swim. And Jerry Marzinski, who I'll use him as an example since you just had him on, he is the perfect example, textbook example of not only a paradigm shift, but somebody who was able to swim and, spar effortlessly with this predator. And so he is one of the first examples that I use for the sink or swim. And, I just love it that he, in his book, he's so genuine in the way he talks about how he stumbled. He stumbled to figure this out. And he saw the patterns. He saw the patterns in the mental hospitals. He saw the patterns in the prison systems, and he put those together. And that's exactly like what I did with this paper. And then he faced the predator through a human predator. It's like this guy's a beast. And he, was able to, rethink his paradigm, his perception, like everything changed when he had that real interaction with that predatory force through that predator man, within the prison system. And, he came out on top. Look at him. He's doing interviews. He's writing books. He's teaching people about this and how to survive it. And he's proof of it. And so he actually says, about hit the floor when I was reading his book, he says in his book, I found out we are not at the top of the food chain. I'm like, this guy gets it. He lives it, he breathes it, he walks, the talk. Like, he is the real deal when it comes to this. And he is, in my opinion, a textbook example of someone who peeked through the firmament, saw the horror of it, and was like, oh, hell no, I am going to figure this out. I'm getting to the bottom of this shit, whether it's going down with me, that's what I'm not trying to be a jerk when I'm saying this, but he doesn't look like the rock people. He is dealing with like the worst of the worst in society in these prison systems. He talks about that, how horrific the standards were. And it's like, he's Jerry. He's like this unassuming dude that's going head to head, not only with like the predatory forces that are obsessing and possessing these people, that are scary in and of themselves, but he survived it. So it's like this guy is so going in my paper.
It's interesting, again, going back to the whole thing of like fighting, right, and martial arts, but being in a fight, right, and the emotional roller coaster you go through it, right. So I started martial arts when, similar to you, I was about maybe 6 or 7 when I started martial arts, and when I look back on it, I know that I did it because I don't want to be afraid anymore. I don't want to be afraid of like the older boys who would kick the crap out of me when I was a kid, right? Whatever those things were.
Yes.
Whatever the motivation were. It was probably like a dead arm, and a punch in the guts. But 7-year-old was terrified of that. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for the idea of like, I don't want to be afraid anymore. I'm going to be kind of like a superhero. I'll have I'll learn whatever it was karate for me at the time, So I've got these tools to deal with the stuff. Now, what people tend to think is if you have a black belt or you're an MMA fighter or you've got all this experience that you don't feel fear anymore, right? And it's like nothing could be further from the truth, right? Yeah. What you're going to do is just get used to the fear. That's it. That's what happens, right? Yeah. You're used to the fear. And that happens in 2 different ways. You get used to that physical adrenal dump you get when you're going to, when things are going to go sideways. Yes. And what that does to your body, right? And then also, you know what it's like to get hit, right? So you're not paralyzed.
We talked about that. Yeah, we talked about that, how it's very psychological. Now, even people who aren't trained fighters, anyone that's played sports, in sports and in fighting, it's very, even though it's physical and people call us dumb jocks, it's very psychological because you have to recover from either getting hit or making a stupid mistake that affects every one of your teammates. Okay. You have to mentally be able to, you have to still perform physically while recovering mentally. That's some hard shit. Okay. Because no one's babying you. Okay. When you're on the mat, your sensei is screaming in your face to get off the floor, or, your coach is yelling at you for being a dumbass in front of everybody. And then you have to go back out and be the superstar. I mean, it's like there's such a mental game going on. And I think it's great that you and I have that background because we can riff on that and we can say that the predator understands that. The predator's he's a freaking master at that shit. And so, I think that's why you and I can write about this stuff and have these shows, because we live the human side of that. And you really have to understand it's not about punching someone in the face. It's about taking the hit, recovering from it, and then you almost become numb to it, but in a good way. So
it's like,
it takes a lot of punching to get numb to it too. So,
it really does, and I think
beating.
And that's the thing when you talk about Marcinski is that he got in the ring. He got in the ring and he took a kicking and he got up, and that's the thing for me is that when I look at it again, I love your motif. I think it's a great motif and it's a warrior way to look at this, that it is, you're going to get a kicking if you're in this space, right? But we're getting a kicking without knowing about it, right? Yeah. That's what we're getting a beating without even knowing we are.
Yeah. I mean, look at Jerry. Like, I have a friend of mine that's a chiropractor. And he wasn't, he had an experience that I'm so glad he opened up to me because I don't think he normally would have if he didn't understand that I knew all this stuff. But this is a person that didn't have any background in it. That did not save him. I can tell you that. Yeah. It hurt him. So, you really do, you don't have to get into it as much as we do. You don't have to write a freaking paper on it. But don't be naive and think that this shit isn't out there. Because do you really want to be caught off guard? Or do you want to be semi-aware of how to handle yourself? I'm not saying that, if I came face to face, literally, that, I probably would shit myself, but, but I would basically recover and, you're going down with me. if the predator's coming at me, we're both going down. I can tell you that.
but again, that's the fighter's mentality, though. You know, where it's you look at like shamanism, and I can't remember where I read this account. I can't remember exactly where I heard this, but somebody talking about how they do kind of these like ayahuasca ceremonies in Peru, and regularly kind of greys turn up, right? You know, kind of the shamans, these grey aliens turn up, and the shamans just shoo them away, go away,
yeah,
right, and they go away, right, and it's like. Right, in the West, we get taken onto crafts, we get probes, we get all the... Right, in the shamanic societies, just going, go away, shoo, because they have technology and the power and the training, right?
Well, and I think that also what it is that the way that they're seen from the spirit world, and this is something like that my ancestors, we can get into this at another time too, but my ancestors taught me that, you know, it is a little bit about like who you are. And so like, you know, when you say that like shoo away, they can do that because they've done the work. Yeah. They've done the warrior's work. They built up that, like, they're vibrating at the frequency of the warrior. And that's the one thing that, like, what I learned when you're training to be a fighter, you actually want to train so that you never have to use it, to be honest with you. And when 100%. You do use it, you are 100% effective. So like my ancestors taught me that when you're dealing with the spirit world, you want to be at the point where if something like a gray comes up to you, all you have to do is look at them. You don't have to say anything. You know, we talked about this before, before we even like started working together, that you have to get to a point where all you have to do is like a parent looking at a child. You just have to give them the look like, if you want to fuck with me, we like get on the mat. I'm ready for it. Yeah. Otherwise, like, you know, so you have to have that presence of this warrior presence where I will take out my sword. I will chop off your head, but I'd rather not do that. So if you wanted to shoo away, I'm really having a good day. And it reminds me of like Josephine McCarthy, where it's like, she's, I just love the way she talks and presents herself, but because she can like whip some ass, but whip someone's ass. But it's like, to see her, you wouldn't think that, but then the spirit world looks at her and they're like, whoa.
I'm not getting the fucking taking her on.
Yeah. So that's what I'm talking about. Where like, it's more of a presence with a warrior. It's more of like, you just look at somebody and you're like, just please, I don't want to have to do that. I will do this. Yeah. If you really want to, but I don't want to have to.
It's an interesting thing as well, because I look at a lot of kind of like a lot of fighters, when they're kind of, I guess they're in their kind of the mid section of their development, they give the kind of the peacock stuff. They were kind of like, I'm the dog's bollocks. To quote a British phrase, I'm the dog's bollocks. Which I'm the big man. And all that kind of stuff, and that it never lasts, right? Is only temporary. Yeah. But exactly as you're saying, the true point though of kind of martial arts, you get to the point where you're like, well, I don't really need to use it because I don't have any ego stuff going on as well, driving me to get into that fight, right? Yes. I don't have anything to prove. I don't need to go, well, I'm better than you. So now we have to fight. I have to prove
it. It's like, I'm over that. Like, that's exhausting.
You're like, well, also, you get the whole thing where you're like, well, some people are better than me. Yeah. So some people will absolutely beat the living shit out of me with comparative ease. Yes. They're just better martial artists. That's what happens. Yeah. That's what happens.
You know what? I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is the one thing I always tell people that, when I talk about, being an athlete growing up, that is the best humbling thing you could ever put a kid through. At 4 years old, when I was getting laid out, because I was in Taekwondo. Okay. That's like a non-contact sport. My sister and I were put in at a young age. My mom's like, this will be safe because, I don't want you to come home with a black eye and a broken nose. So, but, every once in a while you'll walk into a foot. Okay. And you take it hard and you lay yourself out. That is very humbling. Okay. And then I played sports. I played soccer. I played like all these other sports. And in soccer, I was the only girl on the team. And we were like undefeated for 3 years in a row. So I was like competing with boys like all the time, and boys are rough. So it's like, as a girl, I understood my limitations from the very beginning, but I didn't let that stop me. But it's very humbling to know that, where is your weakness, and then pushing past it. So I think a sports and martial arts is like the best thing that a kid could do, because it humbles you to the point where even as a fighter, you're not going to be, one of these douchebags that goes out, because there is always someone better than you. In sports, you may be at the top, but damn well next year, there is going to be someone that's better than you that's going to come wipe your record right off the, screen up there and take that trophy from you. And you've got, like I said, that's where the psychological, that's where it comes in, the psychological fight.
No, I totally agree with that. There is a huge amount of value in getting your clock cleaned. Right. Yeah. There really is, and like
everyone should have a clock early in life, because your bones are like you can recover from it faster. Like your scars seem to go away as you get older. When you get older, they stay there. But when you're younger, just get punched a couple times and you'll be fine.
Honestly, there's such value in getting punched in the face. there really is. Yes. What was that? I think there was Mike Tyson famously quoted, "Everyone has a game plan until they get punched in the face." And it's true. It's true, And
because you totally go into this like, holy shit, that hurt. That really freaking hurt. Now what do I do? Boom, another leg's coming at boom. And it's like, and then your instructor's like, what are you doing? Yeah. You've been training all these years.
Put your hands up.
Put your hand, do something. And then they snap you out of it. Yeah. So you really need that instructor to snap you out of it, because in real life, you can't tap out. Yeah. You can't tap out on the street. You're done. So it's like, you'd rather get hit a couple times. That way, if God forbid, especially for women, God forbid you ever get into a tangle in real life. You really just, I don't know. In my opinion, I want to be ready for it. So
this is it, and as we kind of know, the fundamental principle of martial arts is when something goes down, something happens, don't be in that place. That's the best self-defense you'll ever get. The best martial arts is completely avoid the fight. And there are a number of ways of doing that, but getting back to the paper. I know we're kind of enjoying this discussion on fighting.
We are basically fighting, some in essence here. So, it does all correspond, and it does, we can find, it does correlate with what we're talking about, where you have to really think outside of this consensual reality that we all live in. And know that not only is there flesh and blood that I talk about, that we were just talking about predators and how to defend yourself, but you really do need to kind of stretch your consciousness and your awareness out to be able to handle anything that this reality throws at you.
So to wrap up the regular show, you talk about initiation. So that people who kind of come up against this and start experiencing things, that is a form of initiation, and that there is a almost evolutionary program behind this. So could you talk to that, and then we'll wrap up the regular show and we'll go into the plus show. Okay.
Yeah. And really it was just that I think that's kind of where I put my corporate hat on, because it's there has to be a reason for this. This is a big effort that this force is going to put us through. So there has to be more than just it's feeding. I mean, I'm sorry, but there just has to be more to it than that. This is a big place. This is a big reality. There's a lot of parts and pieces going on here. And so, I just looked at the researchers that I chose, like the Jerrys, like the Sherry Sweeneys, the Paul Enos, they became better versions of themselves. And then they went on to teach and, communicate and go out and stretch out into the masses to take this message. So, the reason why I came up with the initiation is because what is compelling these people? What is compelling a David Paulides to write these books? I mean, people are, they say nasty things about these people. This isn't a fun thing for someone to go out and lay all this stuff out on the table and take all these punches. This is a very important thing that they're doing, whether, you agree with them or not. So there has to be something more to it, because these people are compelled to share this stuff no matter what comes at them. They're still going and going. I'm sure that Jerry is laughed at amongst the psychiatric community, if you think about it. I mean, I don't know any other psychiatrist that is, or like, he's not a psychiatrist, psychologist, but that's coming out and being as vocal as Jerry. And, it cannot be easy for this man, but something is compelling him to do it. What compelled me to, I went from a corporate suit to this. This is weird, people. This is weird for me to have gone from what I did to this. I cannot tell you. Dara and I have talked about this. This is not this wasn't my MO up until the age of 35. Like the past 10 years has been weird. And so something is compelling all of us. And I put that in the paper. Something is doing this. So, I haven't gotten to the bottom of it yet. And, I don't know if I ever will, but that's what's driving this initiation process. Is something's driving all of us. And maybe someone out there has an answer to it. Let us know.
Well, we're going to do a patron exclusive to talk about kind of your own initiation and kind of some of your kind of work with ancestors as well. So we'll do that kind of separately. But there is a couple of other people that I'd like to connect you with, which we'll talk about after the show, around kind of initiation and around kind of all this stuff that's going on. But we'll park that for now and leave that ambiguously hanging for our listeners to go.
Sounds awesome.
What are you shouting on about, Tara? Anyway, so as we wrap up, you're saying there's a process of this, the initiation that's in this, that there is a crucible of some description, where we're engaging with this, and if we come away intact, we change and we develop. And part of it is this areas of growth, and there's world shattering elements to this, right? And I think where you and I've spoken before, I call those things those personal apocalypse, where I felt I had a kind of a direct engagement with spirits and kind of jinn of the destructive kind in Delhi, and that changed my world. And that's the reason this podcast exists.
You're a perfect example of the, you went to another plateau of awareness and it pushed you into, an evolutionary growth process of the mind.
Yeah.
And so you're another perfect example that, it's like I said, it was very serendipitous that you and I met and that, we're having this conversation because you could very well be in my paper.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay. So on that note, let's wrap up the regular show. Where is the best place for people to want to find out more about you and your work?
Well, right now I am just on Instagram. It's Michelle.DeVrieze. You can put that, in the notes. But I will be posting this paper online, and I'll definitely send you a link for that. Yeah. It's almost finished. The version that I sent you, it still has to go through a little bit more editing because I'm not happy with certain aspects of it. But I'm hopefully by the end of the year, I'll be officially awarded my degree. And I will definitely let everybody know where they can find it. And I will be interviewing as many of the researchers and authors as I can. I created a YouTube channel. It's going to be an academic channel. It's not really like a podcast or anything. It's just like a supplement to the paper. And that way we can drill down, into each author, that I featured a reason I can actually drill down into their work based on the paper. So I think it'll be a really good addition to the paper itself, and maybe it'll help us answer more questions. So.
Fantastic. Well, I really look forward to it. I think it'll be a great addition to this area of exploration.
Yes.
Cool. All right. Yes. So on that note, let's wrap up the regular show, and we will pause briefly and get into the Plus show.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Bye bye, everybody.